Billions were being offered, and none of it was flowing toward the WTA. Brands weren't just chasing Eala. They were quietly abandoning the entire tour. A 19-year-old from the Philippines had become more financially magnetic than a professional circuit built over 5 decades. Not through Grand Slam dominance, not through world #1 rankings, but through something far more powerful and far more dangerous to the establishment: pure, uncontrolled cultural gravity. And when the real financial numbers began surfacing, the tennis world didn't just raise its eyebrows, it held its breath. Because what was unfolding wasn't just another sponsorship story, it was a power shift. A corporate revolution disguised in a tennis skirt. And the WTA never saw it coming. There are certain athletes who outgrow their sport before the sport even realizes what's happening. Muhammad Ali did it. Serena Williams did it. And now, whether the WTA welcomes it or not, Eala is doing it. On a scale that's forcing corporate boardrooms from Manila to Manhattan to rewrite their marketing strategies overnight. Born in the Philippines, shaped by relentless discipline, and refined inside the elite halls of the Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain, Eala carried something into professional tennis that no training manual could teach. She carried a story. A cross-continental, multi-generational narrative that resonated deeply across Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Americas simultaneously. That blend, the underdog geography, the elite European development, the infectious personality, created what marketing executives privately describe as a perfect cultural convergence. Companies noticed long before the rankings ever did. By the time Alex was just beginning to break through on the WTA tour, her social media following had already surpassed many higher-ranked players. But more important than raw numbers was her engagement. Her fans weren't passive, they were emotionally invested. They weren't just watching her matches, they were living her journey. Luxury watch brands, tech giants, telecom companies, sportswear behemoths, especially those targeting Southeast Asian markets, weren't simply interested. They were competing aggressively behind closed doors. Conversations escalated from exploratory calls into serious financial negotiations. And crucially, these talks weren't flowing through the WTA's centralized sponsorship channels. They were heading directly to Eala's personal representation. That distinction changed everything. For decades, the WTA operated under a traditional sports marketing framework: centralized sponsorships, official partnerships, collective revenue models. It worked brilliantly in the pre-social media era. But that system was never built for a reality where a single athlete could command more attention than the entire organization promoting her. Eala represented something the old model simply couldn't contain. An individual brand whose gravity was so powerful, it pulled sponsors out of the tour's orbit without conflict, without rebellion, without intention. Simply by existing. Inside tennis circles, whispers quickly multiplied. Agents began hearing from brand executives that budgets were being reallocated. Tournament sponsors were suddenly less enthusiastic about renewals. The money wasn't leaving women's tennis, and it was concentrating, funneling toward one central cultural force. And that force had a name. That force had a lethal backhand. And that force was only getting started. Then came the numbers. What circulated in private contract discussions wasn't mid-level endorsement money. These were deals typically reserved for multi-time Grand Slam champions. Reports suggested individual brand commitments stacking into portfolio valuations approaching the billion-dollar mark over long-term projections. Telecom giants targeting Southeast Asia saw her as irreplaceable. Sportswear companies recognized her dominance over an emerging youth demographic. Tech corporations viewed her as the ultimate cultural bridge into future markets. But what truly shocked industry insiders wasn't the size of the offers. It was their structure. These weren't standard endorsement deals. Brands weren't asking how she fit into existing WTA frameworks. They were constructing fully customized partnerships, creative collaborations, equity components, media ventures, ambassador architectures, treating her not just as an athlete, but as a standalone media platform. One sports marketing executive summarized it bluntly. Brands decided it was more effective to reach her audience by bypassing the tour entirely. And for the WTA, this carried massive consequences. When sponsorship money shifts from institutional partnerships toward individual athletes, the collective loses leverage. Smaller tournaments lose financial stability. Mid-ranked players lose opportunity. The entire ecosystem begins to strain. And here's the critical truth. Eala didn't create this problem. She wasn't attacking the system. Her team was simply responding to unprecedented demand. That isn't rebellion, that's business. Yet behind closed doors, WTA executives faced an uncomfortable reality. How does an organization remain commercially relevant when one of its players becomes a more attractive investment than the platform itself? How do you adapt decades-old structures to a digital world where individual influence outweighs institutional authority? The answers required speed. But speed didn't arrive. Instead, silence filled the vacuum. While sponsorship negotiations surrounding Eala intensified, the WTA offered no strategic messaging, no positioning statements, no public acknowledgement of the transformation unfolding inside its own ecosystem. And in the modern media environment, silence isn't neutral. Silence hands control of the narrative to everyone else. Journalists, analysts, fan communities, and rival sports organizations rushed to fill that void. The story they told was brutal, an institution caught flat-footed by a shift that had been building for years. Internally, the reasons were complex. The WTA operates across jurisdictions, balancing broadcasters, sponsors, tournaments, and players simultaneously. Decision-making moves slowly by design. But this moment demanded urgency. And urgency never arrived. As corporate partners quietly reassessed their investments, unsettling data surfaced. Audience engagement metrics increasingly favored individual athlete platforms over tour-wide placements. Digital analytics made one conclusion unavoidable. The WTA's ability to deliver certain high-value audiences had weakened. Players across the tour began noticing the downstream effects. Sponsorship conversations slowed. Brands once proud of WTA alignment now mentioned it cautiously, if at all. Veteran players spoke anonymously of frustration. They had spent careers building collective equity, only to watch leadership hesitate at a pivotal moment. And slowly, quietly, the money started moving. Not through dramatic withdrawals, but through contracts that weren't renewed, options that quietly expired, deals that returned with reduced numbers, smaller tournaments tightened budgets, prize money discussions grew tense, operational support for hundreds of lower-ranked professionals began showing cracks. This is the part of the story few headlines capture. While Alex Eala's rise dazzled, the ripple effects hit hardest among players who would never command such sponsorship gravity. Mid-ranked professionals depended on a stable ecosystem. When that ecosystem weakens, careers become fragile. Sports economists recognize the danger immediately. When individual commercial power vastly exceeds institutional equity, financial imbalance becomes inevitable. Superstars flourish, everyone else faces uncertainty. The competitive middle, the backbone of any professional sport, grows unstable. For the WTA, managing this imbalance required bold innovation, structural reinvention, a new commercial framework capable of honoring exceptional individual value while preserving collective sustainability. Whether such leadership existed became increasingly questionable, and then came the interview. There are moments when a single statement shifts an entire narrative. Alex Eala delivered one of those moments. Speaking calmly, thoughtfully, without accusation or bitterness, she addressed the commercial storm surrounding her career. She spoke about responsibility, about representing millions of young girls across Southeast Asia, about honoring cultural identity, about understanding that her platform carried weight far beyond tennis. Then she said something that stopped the conversation cold. She acknowledged, gently, clearly, unmistakably, that the structures of professional women's tennis were never designed for athletes like her. Athletes whose commercial power flows from cultural resonance rather than rankings alone. Athletes whose audiences exist independently of institutional frameworks. Athletes who challenge traditional measurements of value simply by existing. The reaction was instantaneous. Sports media amplified her words within hours. Marketing publications dissected every sentence. Fan communities erupted with pride. Social platforms exploded. Clips from the interview amassed hundreds of millions of views. Hashtags trended worldwide. Major news outlets that rarely covered women's tennis suddenly led with her story. And throughout it all, Alex remained composed, focused, grounded. Training, competing, letting the storm swirl while she stayed anchored in her craft. Ironically, that calm made her even more appealing to brands. The contrast between her clarity and the WTA's defensive institutional response only amplified public sympathy in her direction. When official statements finally emerged, they sounded reactive rather than reflective. Measured observers noted that confident organizations engage criticism openly, defensive ones deflect. One question now dominated every conversation surrounding women's tennis. Was this a temporary disruption, or had the balance of power permanently shifted? Because Alex Eala didn't start a rebellion, she simply became too large for the existing structure to contain. Brands follow genuine value, audiences follow authentic connection, and institutions built for a bygone era struggle when confronted by digital age influence that refuses to fit inside traditional boxes. The numbers don't lie. Sponsors don't move billions on emotion. Something fundamental has changed. Women's tennis stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward adaptation, innovation, and collective evolution. The other leads toward fragmentation, imbalance, and slow decline. The decisions made now will define the sport's future for decades. And standing at the center of that crossroads is a 19-year-old from the Philippines, carrying an entire nation's hopes on her shoulders, reshaping global business models, and forcing one of sport's most powerful institutions to confront a reality it can no longer ignore. This is no longer about tennis. This is about power. This is about culture. This is about who controls the future of women's sports, and whether the system can evolve quickly enough to survive the force of a generation that refuses to wait. Because Alex Eala isn't just winning matches, she's rewriting the rules, and the revolution has only just begun.